Armenia is located in the Middle East, surrounded by Turkey at the western border, Georgia at the northern border, Azerbaijan on the eastern border, and Iran on the southern border. Now, flashback about 138 years. Azerbaijan and Georgia are not an established country yet, and the Islamic Ottoman Empire controls the Middle East. Russia, though, has recently won the Russo-Turkish War and has gained lots of land from the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is greatly weakened by this loss, and the only thing keeping Russia from taking over the Ottoman Empire is the Treaty of Berlin, which reduced Russia's gains on the other side of the Black Sea. The treaty also stated that the Ottoman government had to give legal protection to the Christian Armenians, which really didn't happen. This led the Armenians to become upset that their protections promised to them were not happening. They needed this protection, for the Armenian people were greatly discriminated by the Ottoman Empire for being Christian. Unrest in the Armenian people started around 1892, where Armenians demanded for reforms in the Ottoman Empire that would end their discrimination, along with the right to vote and the establishment of a constitutional government. Armenians were starting to revolt against the empire as well. They were starting to not pay the double taxation system imposed on the Armenians. In response to this resistance, Sultan Abdulhamid II sent the Ottoman Empire into the areas of unrest with armed groups of Kurdish insurrectionists. These people sent by the Sultan went into towns and killed any Armenians that were against the Ottoman Empire. The worst atrocity occurred when a cathedral containing 3,000 Armenians that had taken refuge there was burned. On August 26, 1896, a group of Armenian revolutionists raided the headquarters of the Ottoman Bank in Istanbul in response to the Armenian massacres. The bank's guards were killed and over 140 staff members were taken hostage. In response to this, tens of thousands of Armenians were massacred. The killings went from 1895 to 1897. By then, all of the Armenian revolutionists had been either killed or had fled to Russia. After the killing, the Ottoman government closed Armenian societies and restricted Armenian political movements. There are no exact numbers to how many Armenians died in these massacres. It is estimated, though, that somewhere between 250,000 and 300,000 Armenians were killed. This tragedy was to be commonly known as the Armenian massacres. This was the first step towards the Armenian Genocide.
Abdulhamid II was the autocratic ruler and the last of the Ottoman sultans. He ruled from 1876 to 1909. During his rule, he was known as the Red Sultan, Abdul the Damned, and the Great Assassin for his part in the Hamidian massacres in the years of 1894 to 1896. Under his authority, this brutal tragedy resulted in the deaths of 100 to 300,000 Armenians. His goal was to reinforce the territorial integrity of the embattled Ottoman Empire, and to reassert the pan-Islamic state of ideology, the political movement to advocate the unity of Muslims under one Islamic state. The Young Turks refer to three ambitious Turkish officers of high rank who seized full control of the government and gained dictatorial powers in 1913. Their names were Muhammad Talat, Ismail Enver, and Ahmad Jamal. They wanted to unite all the Turkic people in the entire region to create a new Turkish empire called the Turan, with one language and one religion. To do so, they would need to exterminate the Christian Armenians, killing almost 2 million people. The plot led to mass arrests, imprisonments, hangings, death marches, and the torture of over 1 million Armenian Christians.
World War I started in 1914 and continued all the way out until 1918, when finally it was ended after 4 years of fighting and millions left dead. The Armenian Genocide mainly took place in this time era. At the beginning of World War I, the Ottoman Empire took its place beside Germany and Austria-Hungary on the Central Powers. The Ottomans used World War I as a cover-up to their horrific plans to end the Christianity religion within the Ottoman Empire and Middle East. This nearly diminished the Armenian population to less than 500,000. The first step the Young Turks had planned was to gather all Armenian soldiers and relocate or either execute them on sight. All of this was because the Armenians had begun to take action to gain their religious freedom. The Armenians sent battalions to help the Russian army fighting against the Turks in the Caucasus region. These exiles and executions supposedly lasted until 1917, but there have been several other small-scale massacres of the Armenians in 1894, 1895, 1896, 1909, and also after the war was over.
One of the worst crimes done by the Turkish government was the death marches. The death marches that the Armenians would embark on were by order of the Young Turks. Many of the Armenians that would endure these atrocities were women, children, and the elderly. The Turks said that they would be taken to non-military camps for their own safety, and were told to pack a few things. They would end up heading towards the south, towards the Syrian desert. Many of them will have had their homes and sometimes their own children taken by Muslim Turks. Millions of the Armenians were sent on these death marches. These death marches would cover hundreds of miles in less months. They would take indirect routes through the wilderness and mountains. These routes were chosen to deliberately prolong the marches and keep away from Turkish villages. The Armenians' food supply would soon run out and were denied food and water. If one of the marchers stopped to rest, they were beaten until they rejoined the group. If anyone refused to continue on their treacherous trip, they would be shot. Many of the female marchers would be sexually abused and sometimes taken. It was common caravan practice to make the marchers nude, for they would be in the hot, scorching sun until they would die of dehydration and exhaustion. About 3/4 of the people marching would die during these marches. Those who did survive the treacherous trip were either ditched in the desert, thrown off cliffs, burned alive, or would drown in rivers.
In the early and middle 20s, modern-day Turkey was still recovering from the impacts of World War I. This time of recovery sparked a new flame that would propel the Turkish people to deny any involvement in the Armenian Genocide. The Turkish people continued to deny the tragedy until new light was brought to it on May 15, 1996. Professor Levon Marslian prepared a testimony on the Armenian Genocide. His testimony stated that those who today deny the Armenian Genocide are resorting to an academically unsound revisionism in order to permit the moral act of remembering this crime against humanity. Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians? This statement was made by Adolf Hitler on August 22, 1939, 4 years before the date that is most frequently associated with the start of the Holocaust. The denial of the Armenian Genocide led to the most gruesome and saddening massacre in the history of the world. Denying the genocide led Hitler to believe that what he was doing would be shook off and forgotten, just like the Armenian Genocide. His decision would forever shake the world and will never be forgotten. ISIS is a violent jihadist anti-Western militant group that has seized a chunk of land stretching from northern Syria to central Iraq. ISIS stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. This group is known for their violence that is cast around the world. The denial of the Armenian Genocide could possibly give the extremists a reason for genociding another ethnic or religious group of people. Now to a reenactment of an interview between two family members of the Gazikin family, which was affected by the Armenian Genocide. Today I'm here with one of the descendants of the Gazikin family. They originally were from Armenia. They lost many of their family members due to the Armenian Genocide, which took place in 1912 to 1923. The Turkish people tried to have them exterminated because of their Christian beliefs. Can you tell us your family story?
Yes. At the beginning, my family lived a prosperous and happy life in Erzurum, known to Armenians as Garin. As the deportations began, my great-great-grandfather and his two sons had been separated and murdered. Although one son had escaped to the U.S., this was my great-grandfather. Their homes and property were seized, and my great-grandmother and her girls were sent on a death march through the desert. They eventually made it to the U.S. Harrips and my great-grandmother were black for the rest of her life to mourn the people murdered in the Armenian Genocide. Luckily for me, some of my family members were able to survive, so I could be here today to talk with you. Many families are not so lucky.
Can you tell me how this affected your family today?
Yes. I think it makes us all humble to all the gifts America has brought us. One thing that has upset me recently is President Obama said he was going to openly confront Turkey about its actions, but he never did. Luckily, there are still people campaigning around the world today to have Turkey officially acknowledge the hideous actions of their past.
That's a shame, but thank you for your time and information. I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
The Armenian people encountered hatred from the Turks during the Armenian Genocide, just as other groups of people encountered hate from people like Hitler and ISIS throughout history. The Turks explored through Armenia to find Armenian people to kill and exile.